The door exploded inward at 2 a.m., wood splintering across the hardwood floor of Marcus Hayes's apartment like shrapnel from a grenade. 3 police officers stormed through the wreckage, their flashlights slicing through the darkness like swords beams dancing across furniture walls, and the startled face of Marcus, who bolted upright in bed sheets tangled around his legs. The harsh light blinded him momentarily, his bare chest exposed in nothing but boxer briefs. His hands instinctively rising as the lead detective barked, "Hands? Where we can see them." Marcus complied, slow and deliberate, his eyes adjusting to the chaos. Overturned chairs, drawers yanked open, papers scattered like confetti across the living room. The detective's boot crunched against the broken doorframe, his sergeant trailing close behind, hand resting on his holstered weapon, while their captain lingered in the doorway, surveying the destruction with a cold, calculating gaze. Marcus's heart steadied, his training kicking in, but the sight of his home being torn apart sparked a quiet fury. On the bedroom wall, his navy blue FBI jacket hung prominently, gold letters spelling out FBI in bold relief, catching the detective's flashlight beam for a fleeting 3 seconds. The light froze there, the room's energy shifting like the air before a storm. The detective's radio crackled, the sergeant's breathing hitched, but they didn't stop. They couldn't stop now. Marcus, a 15-year veteran of the FBI's Public Corruption Unit, watched them with the calm precision of someone taking inventory, his mind already cataloging badge numbers, timestamps, and violations. This wasn't a mistake. This wasn't random. This was the moment he'd been waiting for. The detective, a wiry man with a jaw clenched tight as a vice, moved with practiced efficiency, his flashlight sweeping the room for anything incriminating. "You're in a world of trouble, Hayes," he growled, kicking aside a lamp that had toppled in the chaos. Marcus didn't flinch, his dark eyes tracking the man's movements, noting the name on his badge. "Detective Morrison." The sergeant, Bradley, rummaged through Marcus's dresser, his hands rough and careless, tossing clothes onto the floor. Marcus memorized his face, the slight tremor in his fingers, the way his eyes darted nervously toward the Captain Wilson, who stood like a sentinel at the threshold. "You got anything you want to tell us before we find it ourselves?" Morrison asked, his voice dripping with accusation. Marcus's lips curved into the faintest smile. His federal credentials sat in plain sight on the dresser, a leather folder embossed with the FBI seal unnoticed by the officers in their frenzy. On the nightstand, his encrypted phone charged silently, holding 15 years of case files, evidence of systemic corruption, names, dates, and dirty deals. Morrison's flashlight landed on Marcus's purse, his wallet on the nightstand. The detective's hands moved too smoothly, too practiced, sliding a small plastic bag into the side pocket before pulling it out with a theatrical flourish. Well, look what we have here," he announced, holding up the bag, white powder catching the light. Marcus's fingers traced the edge of his bedsheet, where something cold and metallic lay hidden, a backup recorder they'd missed entirely. He didn't speak, didn't react, but his mind raced through protocols. Fourth Amendment violations, illegal entry evidence tampering. They had no idea who they'd just woken up. "You're under arrest for possession of a controlled substance," Morrison said, his voice smug as if he'd already won. Marcus's smile didn't waver. "I need to see your warrant," he said, his tone calm, authoritative, cutting through the room like a blade. Morrison's jaw tightened. "We don't need a warrant for a noise complaint, sweetheart." Marcus tilted his head, unfazed. "You do for a search this extensive. You've exceeded the scope of any noise complaint investigation." The sergeant paused mid-search, his hands frozen over a drawer, glancing at Morrison for guidance. Marcus pressed on, his voice steady as stone. "This is an illegal search. Fourth Amendment. Map V, Ohio. Terry. Vaz, Ohio. Want me to keep going? Morrison's face darkened, his flashlight beam wavering slightly. You some kind of lawyer? He snapped. I know my rights, Marcus replied, his gaze locking onto Morrison's. And I know you're violating federal law. The word federal hit like a slap, the room's tension spiking. Captain Wilson stepped forward, his presence heavy, his voice measured. Mr. Hayes, we received reports of drug activity at this address. Marcus didn't blink. From whom? What specific probable cause justified forced entry? The three men exchanged glances, the question hanging like smoke. Bradley recovered first, his voice gruff. Anonymous tip. Said you were dealing. Marcus's eyes narrowed. Anonymous tips don't justify warrantless searches of private residences. Miranda v. Arizona, 1966. You're out of bounds. Morrison's hand twitched toward his holster, his patience fraying. You think you're smart? You think you're gonna talk your way out of this? Marcus sat straighter on the bed, his voice never rising, never wavering. I think you're making a mistake you can't undo. I need your badge numbers. All three of you. Morrison's hand instinctively covered his badge, but Marcus's gaze didn't falter. Every citizen has the right to identify officers conducting searches. Badge numbers. Now. The sergeant growled, You're not in a position to make demands. Marcus's response was ice cold. The law disagrees. Wilson, sensing the situation spiraling, provided his badge number reluctantly, his voice tight. Captain Wilson, 4729. Morrison and Bradley followed their numbers delivered with grudging resentment. Marcus repeated each one back, committing them to memory with surgical precision. I also need confirmation your body cameras are recording, he added, his eyes flicking to the red light blinking on Bradley's chest. The sergeant's hand moved to the camera, hesitating, but the light stayed steady. They're recording? Wilson said, his tone clipped. Marcus nodded, his mind already mapping out the federal court filings to come. Good. So when this goes to federal court, there'll be a complete record. Morrison leaned closer, his breath hot with anger. Listen, Hayes, we found drugs in your house. You can cooperate, or we can make this real hard for you. Marcus met his gaze without flinching. Are you threatening me? Morrison smirked. I'm giving you options. Marcus's voice was a quiet blade. Option 1. I confess to crimes I didn't commit. Option 2. You manufacture more charges. Did I miss anything? The room went silent save for the crackle of Morrison's radio. Bradley broke the tension, his voice low and menacing. You got a smart mouth. Marcus didn't blink. I have constitutional rights. Morrison pulled out handcuffs, the metal glinting in the flashlight's beam. You're under arrest for possession of a controlled substance. As the cuffs clicked around Marcus's wrists, he spoke clearly, his voice directed at the body cameras. I'm being arrested based on planted evidence. The officers conducted an illegal search without probable cause or a warrant. I did not consent to this search. Morrison hissed. Shut up. Marcus continued undeterred. I have the right to remain silent, but I also have the right to speak. This is a false arrest based on fabricated evidence. Bradley grabbed Marcus's arm roughly, yanking him to his feet. Move! Marcus complied, his bare feet stepping over the wreckage of his living room, but he kept speaking, each word a calculated strike. I'm requesting immediate legal counsel. I'm requesting a supervisor. I'm requesting a review of the body camera footage. His knowledge of procedure was too precise, too professional, unnerving the officers. Wilson studied him carefully, a flicker of doubt crossing his face. Something wasn't right. As they led Marcus through the destroyed apartment, he catalogued every violation: excessive force, unlawful entry evidence, tampering, civil rights violations. His encrypted phone still sat on the nightstand, its screen dark, but its memory alive with 15 years of secrets. The digital recorder hidden in the bedroom lamp had been running since the door exploded, capturing every word, every planted piece of evidence, every illegal act. At the front door, Bradley hesitated, his hand still gripping Marcus's arm. The sergeant's eyes flicked back to the FBI jacket on the wall, then to Marcus, whose calm was unnerving, unnatural. Normal people panicked during arrests. Normal people didn't quote case law or request body camera reviews. Normal people didn't know federal court procedures with this kind of precision. Morrison pushed Marcus toward the patrol car, but doubt crept into his voice. "You ever been arrested before?" Marcus's response was a quiet challenge. "No, but you have questions, don't you?" Morrison didn't answer. Couldn't answer because the implications were too dangerous. Bradley opened the car door, radio chatter filling the night air, routine calls about traffic stops and domestic disputes, the normal rhythm of police work continuing while they made the biggest mistake of their careers. Marcus slid into the back seat without resistance, his cuffed hands resting calmly behind him. Through the window, he watched them bag the planted drugs, photograph the damage they'd caused, document everything except the truth. But the truth was documenting itself. His recorder was still running. His credentials still sat on the dresser. His phone still held 15 years of federal cases. And Marcus Hayes, the man they thought was their victim, was already planning their reckoning. The patrol car pulled away from the shattered apartment, broken glass glinting under streetlights. Morrison drove Bradley, rode shotgun, and Wilson followed in a separate vehicle standard procedure for high-value arrests. But this was no standard arrest. Marcus sat in the back, the metal partition separating him from the officers, using the window's reflection to study their faces. Bradley turned around, his voice low. "You gonna tell us what you really do for work?" Marcus didn't respond. His silence louder than words. Morrison adjusted the rearview mirror, his eyes narrowing. "Strong, silent type, huh? We'll see how long that lasts." The radio crackled with dispatch calls, the night's normalcy, a stark contrast to the storm brewing in the car. Marcus memorized every word, every glance, every tell. Bradley's voice dropped to a whisper meant for Morrison alone but audible through the partition. "Think he knows anything about the investigation?" Morrison's eyes flicked to the mirror. "What investigation?" Bradley's jaw tightened. "You know what investigation." Marcus's lips twitched the faintest hint of a smile. They were talking about it, the corruption case he'd been building for years, the one they didn't know he was leading. Morrison's voice was firm, but doubt threaded through it. "He can't know about that." Marcus stayed silent, letting their paranoia fester. They turned onto Main Street, the police station looming ahead, all concrete and fluorescent lights, a fortress of bureaucracy where they planned to bury him in the system. But Marcus wasn't the one who'd be buried. The car parked in the prisoner transport area, security cameras tracking their arrival. Bradley turned around again, his voice a mix of threat and bravado. "Listen, Hayes, this can go easy or hard. Depends on you." Marcus met his eyes through the partition. "Which way preserves your careers?" The question landed like a punch, silencing both officers. Morrison killed the engine, his hands gripping the wheel a little too tightly. "What's that supposed to mean?" Marcus's voice was calm, deliberate. "It means you should think carefully about your next moves." Bradley's laugh was forced nervous. "Lady sorry guy, you're the one in handcuffs." Marcus's response was two words, quiet but lethal. For now, Morrison got out first, opening Marcus's door. The cuffs bit into his wrists as the detective pulled him to his feet, muttering, "We're gonna teach you some respect." Marcus didn't resist, but he catalogued every rough grab, every unnecessary push, every violation of prisoner transport protocols. The body cameras recorded it all, their red lights blinking steadily as they led him into the station. Inside, fluorescent lights buzzed overhead, casting harsh shadows across the booking desk. The desk sergeant looked up from his paperwork, his expression bored until he saw Marcus calm, composed, and quoting legal precedent like a textbook. "What we got?" the desk sergeant asked. Morrison smirked. "Cocaine possession. Resisting arrest." Marcus spoke clearly, his voice cutting through the room. "I didn't resist arrest." Morrison snapped, "Shut up." The desk sergeant frowned, something in Marcus's tone not matching the charges. "I need to make a phone call," Marcus said. Morrison scoffed. "You'll get your call when we say so." Marcus's response was immediate. "That's illegal." The desk sergeant's frown deepened, but he said nothing, his fingers pausing over the keyboard. Booking began fingerprints, photographs, personal property inventory. When they processed Marcus's wallet, the desk sergeant paused, pulling out a card. "Says here, you work for the federal government." Morrison's hand froze over the keyboard. "What kind of federal work?" Marcus stayed silent, letting the question hang. He didn't need to speak. The system would do it for him. The desk sergeant typed Marcus's information into the computer, cross-referencing federal databases. The screen flashed a warning, and the sergeant's eyes widened. "Detective, you need to see this." Morrison approached the terminal, his face paling as he read the screen. Marcus's federal ID number triggered a flag: FBI Special Agent, 15-year veteran, current assignment, Public Corruption Unit. The desk sergeant's voice was low, urgent. "He's a Fed." Morrison's radio crackled with an incoming message, but it was too late. They'd crossed every line, and Marcus had been waiting for it. The digital recorder in his apartment was still running. The encrypted phone still held his case files, and the FBI jacket on his wall was more than a decoration. It was a warning they had ignored. Morrison turned to Marcus, his voice tight. "You didn't say you were FBI." Marcus met his gaze, his voice calm but unyielding. "You didn't ask." The room's energy shifted again, the officer's confidence crumbling like the splintered door they'd left behind. They hadn't just kicked in the wrong door, they'd kicked in the door of the man investigating them, and Marcus Hayes was about to turn their world upside down. The fluorescent lights in interview room 3 buzzed like a swarm of angry bees, casting a sterile glow over the gray cinder-block walls. The metal table bolted to the floor, and the single chair where Marcus Hayes sat, his wrists still cuffed behind him. The air was thick with tension, the kind that settles when lies start to unravel. Detective Morrison entered, a thick file folder in hand, slamming it onto the table with a theatrical thud meant to intimidate. Marcus didn't flinch, his dark eyes tracking Morrison's every move, noting the sweat beading on the detective's forehead despite the chilly room. "Let's talk about your drug business," Hayes Morrison said, his voice a forced growl, leaning forward to invade Marcus's space. Marcus remained still, his face a mask of calm, his mind racing through 15 years of FBI training, interrogation tactics, evidence, protocols, constitutional law. He knew this game better than Morrison ever would. The security camera in the corner blinked its red light, recording every word, every gesture. Marcus's voice was steady, cutting through the detective's bravado. "I don't have a drug business." "You planted that evidence." Morrison's eyes narrowed, his fingers twitching on the table. "That's a serious accusation." Marcus tilted his head, his tone almost conversational. "It's a documented fact. I watched you slide that baggie into my wallet." The room went quiet. The only sound, the faint hum of the lights, and the crackle of Morrison's radio clipped to his belt. The detective opened the file, flipping through pages of fabricated reports. Fictional surveillance logs, manufactured witness statements, a carefully crafted narrative designed to bury Marcus. "Says here you've been dealing for months," Morrison said, his voice dripping with mock confidence. "Multiple witnesses saw drug activity at your address." Marcus's lips curved into a faint smile. "Name one witness." Morrison's pause stretched too long, his eyes flicking to the camera, then back to Marcus. "Anonymous sources," he muttered. Marcus leaned forward slightly, just enough to make Morrison shift in his seat. "Anonymous sources don't hold up in federal court. You know that, or you should." The door swung open, and Sergeant Bradley stormed in without knocking. His face flushed, his hand brushing nervously against his holster. He leaned down, whispering something urgent in Morrison's ear, his voice low but not low enough. The computer flagged him as federal law enforcement. Morrison's jaw tightened, but he waved Bradley off. So what? He's a drug dealer who happens to work for the government. Bradley's eyes darted to Marcus, then back to Morrison. "Detective, this is dangerous territory." Marcus didn't move, didn't react, but his mind catalogued every word, every tell. They were starting to crack their confidence, eroding under the weight of their own mistakes. Morrison turned back to him, slamming the file shut. "Let's try this again, Hayes. Who supplies your cocaine?" Marcus's voice was calm, deliberate, each word chosen with precision. "I don't use or distribute cocaine. The evidence you found was planted. Your body camera caught it. So did mine." Morrison's fist hit the table, the sound echoing in the small room. "Stop saying that Marcus didn't flinch." His gaze locked on the detectives. "Stop planting evidence." The words landed like a slap, and Morrison leaned across the table, his face inches from Marcus's. "You think you're smart. Think you can outsmart us." Marcus's response was a quiet blade, slicing through the detective's bravado. "I think you've been under federal investigation for 2 years. Operation Integrity ring any bells?" The blood drained from Morrison's face, his hands trembling slightly as he straightened. Operation Integrity was classified a code name known only to federal investigators and the high-level corruption targets they pursued. Marcus continued, his voice steady as stone. "Systematic evidence planting, civil rights violations, conspiracy to deprive citizens of constitutional protections. Sound familiar?" Morrison backed toward the door, his hand frozen on the handle. "I need to make a call." Marcus's eyes never left him. "To Captain Wilson or your lawyer, choose carefully. Your next decisions matter." The door slammed shut, leaving Marcus alone in the room, the flickering fluorescent light casting shadows across the table. Through the thin walls he heard heated voices, Morrison and Bradley arguing, their panic seeping through the cracks in their facade. "He knows too much," Bradley hissed. "How does he know about Operation Integrity?" Morrison's voice was sharp, defensive. "He's bluffing. He can't know." But Marcus wasn't bluffing. For 2 years, he'd been building a case against this department, documenting every illegal search, every planted drug charge, every violation of constitutional rights. His encrypted phone, left charging on his nightstand, held thousands of hours of surveillance, hundreds of recorded conversations, dozens of documented evidence plantings. The digital recorder hidden in his bedroom lamp had captured the entire raid. The door exploding, Morrison planting the drugs. Bradley's threats, Wilson's complicity. Every word was admissible in federal court, and Marcus had been waiting for this moment The moment they'd give him everything he needed to bring them down. He sat back in the chair, the cuffs biting into his wrists, but his mind was free, calculating, planning. He knew the protocols for federal officer arrests, special notifications, immediate legal counsel, federal oversight. They'd violated every one, and he'd make sure they paid for it. The door opened again, and a new face appeared. Officer Emily Carter, a young woman in uniform, her posture rigid with nervous energy. She carried a paper cup of water, setting it on the table with a hesitant glance at Marcus. "Thought you might need this," she said, her voice low, almost apologetic. Marcus studied her, noting the way her eyes avoided the camera, the slight tremble in her hand as she placed the cup down. "Thank you," he said, his tone neutral, but probing. Emily lingered for a moment, her fingers brushing the edge of the table as if she wanted to say something, but couldn't find the words. Then, in a swift, discreet motion, she slipped a folded piece of paper under the cup, her eyes meeting Marcus's for a fleeting second before she turned and left. Marcus waited until the door clicked shut, before nudging the cup aside with his elbow, palming the note. He unfolded it carefully, his cuffed hands awkward but precise. The message was short-scrawled in hurried handwriting, "FBI knows. Help coming, stay strong." Relief flooded through Marcus, a rare crack in his disciplined calm. His backup was out there closing in. Emily Carter, a rookie officer he'd never met, had just become his lifeline. The door opened again, and Morrison returned his face a mask of forced confidence, but his eyes betrayed him, darting uneasy, like a man who'd just realized he was standing on a trapped door. "All right, Hayes, let's cut the crap," he said, sitting across from Marcus and opening the file again. "We've got witnesses' surveillance evidence. You're going down for this." Marcus leaned forward, his voice low and deliberate. "Your witnesses are fiction. Your surveillance is fabricated. And your evidence, I watched you plant it. So did your body camera. So did the recorder in my apartment." Morrison's hand froze on the file, his knuckles whitening. "You're making this worse for yourself," he growled, but his voice lacked conviction. Marcus tilted his head, his gaze piercing. "Am I, or are you making it worse for yourself? You arrested a federal agent without cause, conducted an illegal search, and planted evidence. That's not just a career-ender, Morrison. That's federal prison." The detective's face twitched, a muscle jumping in his jaw. He stood abruptly, pacing the small room like a caged animal. "You think you're untouchable because you're a Fed?" Marcus's smile was cold, calculated. "I think you're in over your head because I'm a Fed." Bradley burst in again, his face redder than before, his voice a harsh whisper. "Captain wants us to move him to county. Now." Morrison nodded his eyes, never leaving Marcus. "Fine, let's get him processed." Marcus spoke clearly, his voice directed at the camera. "For the record, I'm being transferred without access to legal counsel in violation of my rights as a federal officer." Morrison's hand shot out, grabbing Marcus's arm and yanking him to his feet. "Shut up, Hayes." Marcus didn't resist, but he kept speaking, each word a nail in their coffin. "I'm also noting excessive force during transport. Your body camera's still running, Morrison. So is mine." The detective's grip tightened, but Marcus's calm was unshakable. As they led him down the hallway, the fluorescent lights casting long shadows, Marcus catalogued every violation: delayed Miranda rights, denied phone call, excessive force, evidence, tampering. The station was a maze of concrete and bureaucracy, but Marcus knew it better than they did. He'd studied their procedures, their patterns, their corruption. This wasn't just an arrest. It was the culmination of 2 years of patient, methodical evidence collection. In the booking area, the desk sergeant looked up, his expression shifting from boredom to unease as he saw Marcus. Cocaine possession, Morrison said, shoving Marcus toward the counter. Resisting arrest. Marcus spoke clearly, his voice carrying across the room. I didn't resist, and the cocaine was planted. Your footage will show it. The desk sergeant hesitated, his fingers hovering over the keyboard. He's claiming the evidence was planted, he asked, glancing at Morrison. The detective's face darkened. He's lying. Process him. But the desk sergeant's frown deepened his eyes, flicking to Marcus, then to the computer screen. He typed in Marcus's information, and the system responded with a warning beep. This says he's FBI, the sergeant said, his voice low, urgent. Morrison leaned over the counter, his voice a harsh whisper. Doesn't matter, he's a suspect. The sergeant shook his head, pointing at the screen. It's not just FBI. He's Public Corruption Unit. Active investigation. Morrison's face went pale, his hand gripping the counter for support. Marcus stood silently, letting the system do the talking. The desk sergeant turned to him, his voice cautious. Mr. Hayes, you're saying the evidence was planted? Marcus nodded, his voice calm but firm. I'm saying your officers conducted an illegal search, planted evidence, and arrested me without probable cause. I'm requesting immediate legal counsel and a review of all body camera footage. The sergeant's eyes widened, and he glanced at Morrison, who was already backing away, his radio crackling with an incoming call from Captain Wilson. The hallway to the holding cells was dimly lit, the air heavy with the smell of disinfectant and fear. Morrison and Bradley flanked Marcus. Their steps hurried, their voices low and tense. We need to get him to county before this blows up, Bradley muttered. Morrison nodded, his eyes darting to Marcus. He's not gonna talk his way out of this. Marcus's voice cut through their whispers, clear and deliberate. You're not talking your way out of this either. Federal charges are coming, conspiracy evidence, tampering, civil rights violations. You're on camera, gentlemen. Bradley spun on him, his face inches from Marcus's. You think you're some kind of hero. You're just a guy in cuffs. Marcus met his gaze unflinching. And you're just a guy who's about to lose his badge. The words hit like a punch, and Bradley stepped back, his hand twitching toward his holster. Morrison grabbed his arm, pulling him away. Not here, he hissed. They shoved Marcus into a holding cell, the metal door slamming shut with a clang that echoed through the station. But Marcus wasn't trapped. He was exactly where he needed to be. His backup was coming. Emily Carter's note burned in his mind, and the recorder in his apartment was still running, capturing every second of their downfall. The station's fluorescent lights flickered overhead, but Marcus Hayes sat in the dark, calm and ready, knowing he wasn't their victim, he was their reckoning. The holding cell was a cold concrete box, its walls scarred with scratches and faded graffiti, the air heavy with the stale scent of sweat and metal. Marcus Hayes sat on the narrow bench, his wrist still cuffed his bare chest, exposed under the harsh fluorescent light that flickered like a dying pulse. The station buzzed with activity outside, muffled voices, radio static, the clatter of footsteps, but inside the cell, Marcus was calm, his mind a fortress of focus. He'd activated his emergency beacon during booking a discreet signal embedded in his watch, sending a GPS pulse to FBI headquarters. His team was out there closing in, and the note from Officer Emily Carter, FBI, knows. Help coming. Stay strong. Burned in his memory like a lifeline. The digital recorder hidden in his apartment's bedroom lamp was still running, capturing every word of the raid, every planted piece of evidence, every violation of his rights. Detective Morrison, Sergeant Bradley, and Captain Wilson thought they'd trapped him, but they'd only handed him the final piece of Operation Integrity, the 2-year FBI investigation he'd been leading to dismantle their corrupt department. The cell door's lock was solid, but their case against him was crumbling, and Marcus knew it was only a matter of time before the tables turned. Outside the station's fluorescent-lit halls pulsed with nervous energy. Morrison paced the booking area, his face slick with sweat, his radio crackling with urgent messages from dispatch. "Captain wants us to expedite the transfer to County Bradley," said his voice low but strained, his eyes darting toward the holding cell corridor. Morrison nodded, but his hands trembled as he adjusted his body camera, its red light still blinking. "He's a Fed Bradley. A damn FBI agent." "How did we not know?" Bradley's jaw clenched, his fingers brushing his holster as if seeking reassurance. "Doesn't matter. We stick to the story: drugs in his wallet. Noise complaint anonymous tip. It'll hold." But his voice lacked conviction, and Morrison's eyes flicked to the computer terminal where Marcus's federal ID had triggered a warning. The desk sergeant, still shaken, was typing furiously, cross-referencing databases, his screen flashing with alerts about Marcus's status: FBI Special Agent, Public Corruption Unit, active investigation. "This is bad," the sergeant muttered, glancing at Morrison. "You need to call Wilson. Now." Morrison grabbed his radio, his voice tight. "Captain, we've got a problem. Hayes is flagged as a federal agent. Public corruption." The line crackled, and Wilson's voice came through, sharp and commanding. "Keep him locked down. Move him to county before this gets out of hand." Morrison hesitated, his eyes flicking to the security cameras overhead. What if he's telling the truth about the planted evidence? Wilson's response was immediate. "He's a suspect. Handle it." But Morrison's gut told him they'd kicked in the wrong door at the worst possible time. At FBI headquarters, Assistant Director James Rodriguez was already in motion, his secure phone buzzing with Marcus's emergency beacon signal. He stood in the command center, a sterile room filled with monitors and tactical maps, his team assembling around him: evidence specialists, tactical units, internal affairs, investigators. "Marcus Hayes is in custody at Metro Police," Rodriguez said, his voice clipped, authoritative. "Arrested on fabricated drug charges by the very officers he's been investigating." His second-in-command, Agent Laura Chen, pulled up Marcus's case file on a tablet, the screen glowing with 2 years of surveillance data, recorded conversations, and documented corruption. "Operation Integrity," she said, her voice grim. "He's been building this case against them for 24 months. They must have figured out he was closing in." Rodriguez nodded, his jaw tight. "They didn't figure out anything. They got sloppy, and Marcus was ready. His beacon activated 20 minutes ago. We're moving now." The room hummed with activity as tactical teams geared up, their black vests emblazoned with FBI in bold yellow letters. Evidence specialists prepared to seize body camera footage, computers, and internal communications. Legal experts finalized federal warrants signed and ready for execution. Rodriguez's phone buzzed again, a call from Officer Emily Carter, her voice trembling but resolute. "This is Officer Carter, Metro Police. I have body camera footage showing Detective Morrison planting drugs on Agent Hayes. I'm uploading it to a secure server now." Rodriguez's eyes narrowed, his mind racing. "Officer Carter, keep that footage safe. Do not let anyone delete it. We're en route." The line went dead, and Rodriguez turned to his team. "Full federal response. Marcus is in danger, and we're not letting them bury this." Back at the station, Emily Carter stood in the equipment room surrounded by rows of charging body cameras, their red lights blinking like silent witnesses. Her hands shook as she reviewed the footage from Morrison's camera, the timestamp reading 2:17 a.m., the moment he slid the baggie into Marcus's wallet, then discovered it with a smug announcement. Her stomach churned. She'd heard whispers about evidence planting suspicious arrests and questionable searches, but seeing it on her own department's footage was a gut punch. Marcus's voice echoed in her mind, calm and precise, quoting case law, requesting badge numbers, demanding a warrant. No civilian knew that much about procedure. No civilian stayed that composed during an arrest. She ran Marcus's name through the federal database, her breath catching as the results loaded. FBI Special Agent Marcus Hayes, 15-year veteran public corruption unit lead investigator on Operation Integrity. The same unit investigating her department. Emily's hands trembled as she dialed the FBI tip line, her training kicking in. Federal Bureau of Investigation. This is Agent Carter, Metro Police. I need to report a federal agent in custody. The voice on the other end was sharp, urgent. Agent's name. Emily swallowed hard. Marcus Hayes, Public Corruption Unit. The charges are fake. I have proof. The line crackled with typing. Then the agent's voice hardened. Do not let anyone touch that footage. We're sending a team. Emily hung up, her heart pounding. She'd just crossed a line, but there was no going back. In the holding cell, Marcus sat silently, his eyes fixed on the door, his ears attuned to the chaos unfolding outside. Footsteps echoed down the corridor, voices overlapping in a frantic hum. He knew his beacon had reached headquarters, and Rodriguez would be mobilizing. The note from Emily Carter was a wild card, a sign that someone in this corrupt department had a conscience. The door swung open, and Morrison appeared, his face a mix of anger and unease. We're moving you to county, he said, grabbing Marcus's arm and pulling him to his feet. Marcus didn't resist, but his voice was clear, directed at the body camera still blinking on Morrison's chest. For the record, I'm being transferred without access to legal counsel in violation of federal protocols for officer arrests. Morrison's grip tightened, his voice a low growl. Keep talking, Hayes. It won't change anything. Marcus met his gaze unflinching. It changes everything. You're on camera, Morrison. Every move you make is evidence. Bradley appeared behind him, his face pale, his eyes darting nervously. Let's go, he muttered, shoving Marcus toward the corridor. As they marched him through the station, Marcus catalogued every detail, the hurried whispers, the nervous glances, the desk sergeant's uneasy stare. The station's security cameras tracked their every move, and Marcus knew his team would seize that footage soon. Outside, black SUVs rolled into position around the Metro Police Station, their engines silent, but their presence unmistakable. FBI tactical teams exited in formation, their vests gleaming under streetlights, their movements precise and coordinated. Rodriguez led the operation from a surveillance van parked a block away, its equipment humming with intercepted police communications. They're trying to transfer him to County Agent Chen, reported, her ear pressed to a headset. They're rushing to bury the case. Rodriguez's voice was steel. Not happening. Execute the warrants. The legal team moved first, serving federal orders that placed the station under FBI jurisdiction. Tactical units took positions at every entrance, their radios crackling with confirmations. Inside the van, monitors displayed live feeds from the station's security cameras, showing Morrison and Bradley escorting Marcus toward the transport area. Rodriguez's eyes narrowed as he watched Marcus, calm, composed, his head held high despite the cuffs. He's playing them, Rodriguez said, a hint of pride in his voice. He's been ready for this. Chen pulled up the body camera footage. Emily had uploaded the screen showing Morrison's hands planting the drugs. This is airtight, she said. Federal prosecutors will eat this up. Rodriguez nodded, his radio crackling as he gave the order. All units move in. Secure Agent Hayes and all evidence. Inside the station, the atmosphere shifted like a storm breaking. The desk sergeant's radio buzzed with an urgent message, his face paling as he listened. "FBI's here," he whispered, his eyes darting to Morrison. The detective froze, his hand still on Marcus's arm. "What?" The sergeant pointed toward the front entrance, where shadows moved beyond the glass doors. "Federal agents. They've got warrants." Bradley's face went white, his hand dropping from Marcus's shoulder. Marcus spoke, his voice low but piercing. "You didn't think I was alone, did you?" Morrison spun on him, his eyes wild. "What did you do?" Marcus's smile was cold, deliberate. "My job." The front doors burst open and FBI agents poured in, their voices booming across the station. "Federal Bureau of Investigation. This facility is now under federal jurisdiction." Officers scattered, some reaching for weapons, others raising their hands in surrender. Rodriguez strode through the chaos, his badge held high, his voice commanding. "Stand down! All personnel will comply with federal authority." Morrison and Bradley backed against the wall, their faces a mix of shock and fear. Marcus stood calmly, his cuffs glinting under the lights, his eyes locked on Rodriguez. "Assistant Director," he said, his voice steady. "Good to see you." Rodriguez signaled his team, and an agent moved to uncuff Marcus, the metal clicking open with a soft snap. "You okay?" Rodriguez asked, his eyes scanning Marcus for injuries. Marcus nodded, rubbing his wrists. "Better now. They gave me everything we needed." Rodriguez's lips twitched in a rare smile. "You always were a magnet for trouble." The tactical team moved through the station, securing computers, body cameras, and evidence lockers. Legal experts served warrants to a stunned Captain Wilson, who emerged from his office, his face ashen. "Director Rodriguez." "This is irregular," he said, his voice shaking. Rodriguez held up a warrant, his voice cold. "Captain Wilson, you're under arrest for conspiracy to violate civil rights evidence, tampering, and false imprisonment." Wilson's eyes widened, his hands rising instinctively. "This is a mistake." Rodriguez's gaze was unrelenting. "The mistake was yours. You arrested our lead investigator." Marcus stepped forward, his FBI credentials now in hand, retrieved from the evidence bag. "Operation Integrity," he said, his voice carrying across the room. 2 years of evidence, all pointing to your department. You just made it easy for us." Emily Carter watched from the equipment room, her heart pounding as federal agents swarmed the station. She'd uploaded the body camera footage to a secure FBI server, her hands trembling as she sent the final file. The screen showed Morrison's damning actions, time-stamped and undeniable. She'd made her choice, conscience over loyalty, and now the consequences were unfolding. An FBI agent approached her, his voice calm but firm. "Officer Carter, we need you to come with us. You're a witness." Emily nodded, her throat tight. "I understand." As she stepped into the hallway, she saw Marcus, now free, standing beside Rodriguez. Their eyes met, and Marcus gave her a slight nod, a silent acknowledgement of her courage. The station was a whirlwind of activity, computers being wheeled out, evidence bags sealed, officers questioned. Morrison and Bradley were cuffed, their badges stripped, their faces pale with the realization of their downfall. Wilson stood frozen, his authority crumbling as federal agents read him his rights. Marcus walked through the station, his FBI windbreaker now draped over his shoulders, his credentials clipped to his belt. The other officers stared, some in shock, others in fear, as the truth sank in: the man they'd arrested wasn't a suspect. He was the investigator who'd been watching them for years. Rodriguez handed Marcus his encrypted phone, retrieved from the evidence locker. 23 missed calls from headquarters, Rodriguez said. "You've been busy." Marcus scrolled through the notifications, his case files intact, his evidence secure. They thought they could bury me, he said, his voice low. They buried themselves. Rodriguez nodded his eyes, scanning the station. We've got their servers, their cameras, their communications. Operation Integrity just went from investigation to prosecution. Marcus's gaze landed on Morrison, now being led away in cuffs. They didn't know who they were dealing with, he said. Rodriguez clapped a hand on his shoulder. They do now. As the FBI team secured the station, Marcus stepped outside, the dawn air cool against his skin. The black SUVs lined the street, their lights flashing silently, a stark contrast to the chaos inside. His phone buzzed with a secure message from Chen. Federal prosecutors are ready. Indictments in 24 hours. Marcus exhaled the weight of 2 years of undercover work, lifting slightly. The raid on his apartment, the planted drugs, the illegal arrest. It was all the evidence he needed to close the case. Morrison, Bradley, and Wilson had walked into his trap, and Emily Carter had given him the key to lock it. But the fight wasn't over. The station was just the beginning, a single node in a network of corruption he'd been unraveling for 15 years. As he stood in the parking lot, the rising sun casting long shadows, Marcus knew the real battle would be in court, where every violation, every lie, every planted piece of evidence would be laid bare. He was ready. Operation Integrity wasn't just an investigation, it was a reckoning, and Marcus Hayes was its architect. The federal district courthouse loomed like a monument to justice, its stone facade glowing under the morning sun as Marcus Hayes walked through its halls, his FBI credentials clipped to his suit jacket, his face a mask of quiet determination. Inside courtroom 7, the air was thick with anticipation, the gallery packed with reporters, community activists, and a few stunned Metro police officers who hadn't been indicted. Evidence boxes lined the prosecutor's table, stacked high with 15 years of Marcus's work surveillance logs, recorded conversations, body camera footage, all meticulously compiled under Operation Integrity. Today was the culmination of his 2-year investigation into the Metro Police Department's systemic corruption, and Marcus sat at the prosecutor's table, his eyes scanning the defendants. Detective Morrison, Sergeant Bradley, and Captain Wilson, their faces pale, their police uniforms replaced by ill-fitting suits. The jury had deliberated for 3 days, and now Judge Eleanor Harrison, a no-nonsense veteran of the bench, reviewed the verdict forms, her voice steady as she addressed the courtroom. Has the jury reached a verdict? The foreman, a middle-aged woman with a calm demeanor, stood. We have, Your Honor. Marcus allowed himself a small breath, his mind replaying the trial, the weeks of testimony. The damning body camera footage, the moment Officer Emily Carter took the stand to corroborate his evidence. This was it, the moment justice would either stand or fall. The foreman's voice carried across the silent courtroom, each word a hammer strike. On the charge of conspiracy to violate civil rights under color of law, we find the defendant, Detective James Morrison, guilty. Morrison's head dropped, his hands trembling in his lap. On the charge of evidence, tampering, guilty. On the charge of false imprisonment, guilty. The verdicts rolled on each one, a confirmation of Marcus's work. Sergeant Bradley received 12 years for 22 counts of evidence tampering and 31 false arrest reports. Captain Wilson drew 15 years for conspiracy to operate a criminal enterprise under color of law, his systematic violation of constitutional rights laid bare. Morrison, the ringleader, faced 20 years, his 17 confirmed evidence plantings, and 43 illegal searches documented in excruciating detail. Marcus's testimony had been the cornerstone, cool, professional, devastating. He'd recounted every planted drug charge, every warrantless search, every constitutional violation. His voice never wavering as he presented the jury with 2,000 hours of surveillance footage, 300 recorded conversations, and 67 documented instances of corruption. The jury had listened, their faces growing grimmer with each revelation, the scope of the department's rot sinking in. This wasn't about a few bad apples, it was a criminal enterprise hiding behind badges, and Marcus had exposed it brick by brick. As the judge dismissed the jury, the courtroom erupted in murmurs, reporters scribbling frantically, their pens racing to capture the historic verdicts. Marcus stood, his FBI windbreaker folded over his arm, his eyes meeting Emily Carter's across the room. She'd testified for the prosecution, her insider perspective sealing the case, her decision to upload the body camera footage to a federal server a turning point. She'd chosen conscience over loyalty, risking her career to do what was right. Now she stood in the gallery, her uniform replaced by civilian clothes, her transfer to a federal task force already approved. Marcus gave her a slight nod, a silent thank you for her courage. The defendants were led away in cuffs. Morrison's eyes hollow, Bradley's head bowed, Wilson's face a mask of defiance, crumbling under the weight of reality. Outside the courthouse, steps buzzed with protesters, their signs demanding police reform, their voices chanting for justice. Marcus stepped into the hallway, reporters swarming him like moths to a flame. Agent Hayes, how long did this investigation take? One asked, shoving a microphone in his face. Marcus paused, choosing his words carefully. 15 years of careful documentation, 2 years on this department alone. Another reporter pressed forward. What message does this send? Marcus's gaze was steady, his voice firm. Justice requires patience, courage, and people willing to work within the system to change it. Truth doesn't disappear. It waits for the right moment to surface. The reporter scribbled his words, knowing they'd lead tomorrow's headlines. Emily approached through the crowd, her expression a mix of relief and resolve. Agent Hayes, she said, her voice soft but steady. Thank you for giving me the chance to do the right thing. Marcus shook his head. You made that choice yourself, Officer Carter. That took guts. Her testimony had been crucial, detailing the moment she saw Morrison plant the drugs, her decision to contact the FBI, her upload of the footage that turned whispers of corruption into undeniable evidence. She'd faced ostracism from her colleagues' threats, from those still loyal to Wilson, but she'd stood firm, her conscience guiding her. Now she was starting over, her career redefined by a single act of moral courage. Marcus extended his hand, and she shook it, a quiet alliance forged in the crucible of truth. As they parted, Marcus's phone buzzed, Assistant Director Rodriguez's name flashing on the screen. He answered, stepping into a quiet corner of the courthouse. Outstanding work. Marcus Rodriguez said, his voice warm with pride. The corruption unit wants to discuss your next assignment. Marcus glanced at the protesters outside their signs, a reminder of the work still to come. What's the case? Rodriguez's tone turned serious. Immigration detention facilities. Systematic abuse allegations. Could take years. Marcus didn't hesitate. I'll take it. He walked to his car, the weight of the trial lifting, but replaced by the familiar pull of duty. The protesters' chants echoed behind him, their calls for reform, a testament to the community's awakening. Marcus knew change didn't happen overnight. It took decades, case by case, violation by violation. Operation Integrity had begun with rumors of planted evidence, whispers of corruption he'd overheard as a young agent. It ended with federal convictions, 23 officers indicted, nearly half the department exposed. The fallout was already reshaping the system, new training protocols, mandatory body camera audits, expanded federal oversight. The community's healing process would be slow. Trust rebuilt, one interaction at a time. But Marcus's work, had lit the path. He slid into his car, the engine humming to life, and pulled out his encrypted phone, its screen glowing with case files for his next assignment. The work never ended, but neither did the mission. Corruption hid in darkness, but Marcus Hayes worked in light, and light always won eventually. The lesson of Operation Integrity was clear, etched into every piece of evidence. Every verdict, every protester's signed justice demands persistence. It requires individuals like Marcus, who spent 15 years building cases with unwavering dedication, and like Emily, who chose truth over loyalty at great personal cost. It demands communities that refuse to stay silent, that hold power accountable, that demand reform even when the system resists. Marcus's investigation wasn't just about exposing corruption. It was about showing what's possible when one person stands up, when one voice speaks truth, when one case becomes a catalyst for change. The Metro Police Department's collapse was a warning to every corrupt system: no one is untouchable. Not when federal agents like Marcus Hayes are watching. As he drove away from the courthouse, the city skyline stretching before him, Marcus knew his next case was waiting another battle in the long war for justice. Immigration, detention facilities, systemic abuse. It would be years of undercover work, patient evidence, gathering, methodical justice building. But that's what he did. Who? He was a federal agent, a truth seeker, a justice builder. The community would rebuild the system, would reform, and the truth would survive. One case at a time, one patient investigation at a time. Marcus's phone buzzed again, a message from Rodriguez Federal: raid on detention facilities begins next month. Your lead. Marcus nodded to himself, his hands steady on the wheel. The verdicts today were a victory, but they were also a call to action. Corruption wasn't just in police stations, it was in every institution that abused power, every system that silenced the vulnerable. Marcus's work was a reminder that justice delayed isn't justice denied when truth-tellers persist. Morrison would serve 20 years, Bradley 12, Wilson 15. Their victims would receive compensation, their crimes etched into permanent record. But Marcus was already looking ahead. His next case file opened his mission enduring. The protesters' voices faded as he drove, but their message lingered. Awareness is only the first step. Action, relentless, principled, courageous action was what changed the world. Marcus Hayes would keep acting, keep investigating, keep shining light into the darkness, because that's what federal agents do, and that's how justice prevails.